members from Sharon's Public School going to discuss about the topic embracing multilingualism in school. Educational system in most countries are characterized by monolingual norms. In light of migration and transnational mobility all over the world, researchers from educational as well as linguistic disciplines request a multilingual turn. Educational staff play a key role in this process, acting as agents between language, policies and practices. This paper will present key findings from ongoing research project on a particular school form, an integrative model that aims to integrate newly arrived pupils and their language practices in the mainstream classes from the very beginning, and includes multilingual staff in the process. This case is particularly interesting, as multilingual educational staff are extremely rare and migration-related multilingualism is usually not considered as part of pedagogical expertise. As we will show in the literature review, what does a multilingual term in a school look like if multilingual staff is employed in the mainstream system? In order to answer this question, a qualitative study was conducted based on Bourdieu's concepts of language as capital and linguistic market. This theoretical framework as background to our research will be presented, followed by the specific context of the multilingual school team, as well as the methods, interview and participatory observation, which we applied for data collection. These qualitative data allow a deep insight into the perception of multilingualism of policy makers, the teaching staff, and of multilingual actors themselves. Completed by insights from participatory observations, our findings present a multidimensional perspective of the case, which we will discuss focusing on the role of multilingual staff for a multilingual turn. Multilingualism is a social reality. The exact number of children and young people growing up multilingually is not known and not statistically recorded. Indirect indications can be found in statistics on the so-called migrant background with approximately 30 to 50%. These figures neither reflect the language constellations nor the actual language practices of the children. However, for pedagogical practice, these figures have a significant consequence. Teachers work in increasingly heterogeneous groups with respect to the children's language biographies. In addition, as any other language embraces a series of sociolects, regiolects, and different linguistic registers that children bring with them as a learning resource. Transnational mobility increases this language heterogeneity even further socio-economically or politically motivated. As refugee migration or supported by internationalization funds such as Erasmus, this voluntary and involuntary mobility continues to shape social multilingualism. Multilingualism in educational context. At the same time, this multilingual reality is opposed by the monolingual approach at school in many countries, including Germany. This disparity puts all those at a disadvantage who deviate from the dominant linguistic norm and has an effect on the educational success of children that grow up multilingual. It has also consequences for their linguistic development. Multilingualism how it emerges and how it develops depends largely on how society deals with languages. The monolingual orientation of educational institutions shapes individual linguistic development and can lead to language rejection. As a reaction to this development, researchers across disciplines and countries have called for a so-called multilingual term. The perception of multilingualism as a social reality and hence as a linguistic norm. In the field of multilingualism education, this call draws on psycholinguistic and socio-political arguments concerning cognitive and linguistic transfer. The importance of all linguistic resources in learning and development processes. The socio-political need to overcome the deficit perspective on linguistic minorities as well as the use of migration-related resources in a democratic society. Over the past 10 years, data from empirical teaching and school research have supported these psycholinguistic and social political arguments. Empirical studies confirm that when migration-related multilingualism is constructively included in the classroom, it has positive effects on multilingual students as well as their peers. This has been corroborated by finding on multilingual literacy activities. Studies on methods of multilingual didactics in foreign language teaching, but also on the productive use of family languages in mathematics and other subjects. Finally, studies on classroom interaction complement these findings. Despite the normative theoretical discourses, scientific arguments, the proven effectiveness of methods at the teaching level and school development concepts at the structural level depicted above, however, teachers in most countries, including Germany, continue to orient themselves toward a monolingual norm. The question in multilingualism education remains: how can a multilingual term be achieved? Multilingual teachers as change agents. In recent years, a key role in the transformation processes of educational landscape has been assigned to immigrant teachers as role models for a successful educational career, as bridge builders between parents, teachers, and students, and as experts on multilingualism and intercultural communication. This perspective has led different actors around the world to call for a more diversified teacher population. Teachers with immigrant background are an example for successful upward mobility in education because of their specific bicultural and bilingual competences as well as their function as a role model. They can play a significant role for the cultural opening of the school. Even though the immigrant background of those teachers appears as a potential from this perspective, the political call reveals a series of underlying deficit-oriented assumptions. First, it implies that immigrant students need a role model in order to be motivated. It leaves the responsibility for academic achievement to the student themselves and diminishes the role of the school system and the institutional discrimination processes. It further implies that a bridge has to be built between teachers and students still belong to a different culture, and finally, it is based on the assumption that immigrant teachers are pursued competent in dealing with linguistic and cultural diversity even without a specialized training in linguistic or language teaching. Broadly criticized as othering in sociological discourse, the legitimation of these assumptions still lacks empirical basis. Interview studies on the self-perception of pre-service teachers illustrate that immigrant background as such is not the reason for choosing the teacher's profession. The interviewees appear reluctant to assume the role of language and cultural mediators and open themselves to this role only after having experienced injustice in treatment of children with immigrant backgrounds. In most cases, however, this role is ascribed to them by school principals and colleagues. Immigrant teachers are asked for translation or help in specific language support situations. Often, even they have hardly any experience, knowledge, or opportunity to reflect on this task. Recent studies show that teachers go so far as to distance themselves from this task and rather request to be accepted as professionals. While these perspectives on immigrant students and teachers have been broadly investigated, there are hardly any studies that address their potential for initiating in the educational system transformation processes toward a multilingual approach. As a reaction to this lacuna, we have conducted a qualitative study that investigates this potential from a multi-dimensional perspective using interviews with multilingual educational staff as well as participatory observation. School as linguistic market and multilingual staff as change agents. The model of the linguistic market and the economy of linguistic exchange enables us to analyze social power relations in which language practices are regarded as strategies of self-positioning in social space. According to Bourdieu, each individual holds different forms of capital: cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. The position of the individual within the social space is hence determined by the capital it holds. That is, by competencies and educational qualifications, by social contracts, and by material possessions. Language represents a particular form of cultural capital because languages plays a central role here as a place of socialization where students experience the significance of language. While knowledge of the legitimate language is rewarded, deviations from the linguistic norm are sanctioned. Finally, the student's equipment with cultural capital is documented in testimonials. The average grade, but also certificates for certain language skills, are regarded as decisive criteria when allocated to a particular type of school. For obtaining access to higher education or to vocational training, consequently, linguistic capital determines the educational and professional career. What is considered relevant knowledge? For example, whether Latin and ancient Greek are of higher value than Italian or Russian is influenced by the group with the largest volume of capital, policy makers. Hence, schools as institutions and teachers as their actors produce and reproduce the existing linguistic power relations. Following this conceptual framework, immigrant teachers would play an important role in the transforming the linguistic market of a school. Being persons of authority and representing a societal group with power themselves, they would be able to question the existing language hierarchy in their feedback on immigrant languages and represent the legitimacy of migrant languages in everyday interactions. However, research on new immigrant teachers is extremely scarce, as teachers from other countries are rarely integrated into the national school system. Hence, their actual potential for transforming the monolingual mindset at school remains unclear. In order to investigate this question, one specific educational context has been selected. The study takes place in Hamburg, which is a city-state in northern Germany. Normally, newly arrived peoples in Hamburg attend a preparatory class called IVK for 1 year, which focuses on the systematic acquisition of German as a second language. After this year, they pass on to the mainstream system. In contrast, the school or research is based on educates newly arrived pupils in an integrative way. Already after a few weeks, the pupils are assigned to mainstream classes and get language support in a preparatory class once a day. By doing so, the school represents a special case in the educational landscape of Hamburg. When the school started a preparatory class in October 2015, they employed a multilingual cultural mediator. In August 2018, they employed multilingual educational consultant for Romani children. Following the presented theoretical background on language as capital and multilingual actors' role as change agents on the linguistic market of a school. Methodology. We will draw on interviews and participant observations of their pedagogical practice in order to assess the perception of multilingualism on different levels. Interviews were conducted with policymakers as well as school employers and the multilingual characters themselves. Hence, the paper is based on the following data. 4 guideline-based interviews with the teacher of preparatory class, the cultural mediator of the school, the educational consultant of the school, and the director of the Department of Refugee Education, as well as informal conversation with the head teacher of the school. The interviews and informal conversation provided the main data of our analysis, but they are complemented by experts of protocols from the participatory observation. This allows us to enrich the experts' perspective by using very specific examples of multilingual practices in classroom interactions. The role of multilingual staff. This category contains the aspects employment, function and self-perception of multilingual staff. Employment. Lucas Romano, Director of the Department of Refugee Education, explains that a school in Hamburg gets financial resources from the municipality by way of public grants if they have preparatory classes. These grants enable a school to employ cultural mediators. For instance, people who are interested in becoming cultural mediators can attend a training at the State Institute for Teacher Training and School Development. This allows the department to impart parents' evening. It may be translating a flyer. Mrs. Akbar points out the importance of her work for the pupil as well as for herself. Mr. Albu, the educational consultant for Romani children, described her functions as follows. Me, as an educational consultant, I should be available as a teacher, which means teaching language and history. I should be available as social worker, which means building bridges between family, pupils and school colleagues. I should be available as interpreter for discussion with parents. When asked whether she is actually teaching, she says no and outlines that her position has been newly created and that the school is still in the process of determining her actual functions. At the moment, she primarily works as a social worker and gives individual tuition to a Romanian-speaking girls who arrived a few months ago. Focus of this study. For the children of migrants, learning the with this challenge because of growing levels of mobility. Enabling such children to access teaching and learning quickly is critical to ensuring that can reach their potential and progress to higher education and employment to the same degree as non-migrant children. In the process, the children themselves gain linguistic and meta-linguistic skills from learning the language of instruction and assessment in addition to their mother tongue. This research is designed to gather, analyze and synthesize existing data and research on: first, what works to enable migrant children who use a language at home different to the language of school instruction to participate in learning, attain proficiency in the language of instruction and achieve results, progress to higher education, progress to employment that match their potential, and what works to maintain and develop the multilingual skills of migrant children which will enable them to use these competencies for cultural and economic purposes. The challenge: because of increasing mobility, multilingual classrooms are become more commonplace in many EU countries, as is the range of mother tongues that children have. It is clear that, first, migrant children without the language of instruction do not reach their potential and are more likely to leave school early and have lower levels of attainment throughout their schooling. Children are always provided with support to learn their mother tongue. Third, schools can reduce the difference in attainment between native children and children without the language of instruction as they progress through their education. It is accepted in this study that learning the language of instruction is necessary for children to reach their potential, that bilingualism increases children's cognitive skills and their ability to learn languages effectively, and that barriers affect the educational outcomes that children without the language of instruction can achieve. Method: to address these questions, the study has comprised a literature review drawing on academic research and grey literature. Second, a series of roundtable discussions involving practitioners and experts. And third, a study visit to Cologne to see what is happening to the ground and to have further discussion with practitioners and experts. It was important for the study to include research which was based on empirical evidence and practitioners' experiences, provided that the method and their limitations were understood so that the strength of evidence could be assessed. The context was known so its transferability could be considered, and practitioners' experience was drawn on a systematic way. Reception and integration. Participation in early childhood education and care, ECEC. There is conclusive research evidence which shows that ECEC can have positive learning and progression outcomes for migrant children, which gives them the start they need to develop their skills in the language of instruction. Practitioners believe that better results are achieved where there is outreach to ensure migrant children take up free provision of ECEC, and where ECEC providers have a systematic curriculum of language learning, placement and admission. While migrant children are segregated and schools with higher proportions of migrant children have lower attainment. There is no conclusive research evidence that segregation is a cause and that reducing it will improve attainment. Practitioners believe that reducing segregation does, however, help schools to manage and that the greatest benefit of this comes from increasing cultural awareness of all children. They also believe that it is more important for education authorities to ensure that the quality of leadership and teaching in schools with children without the language of instruction can meet the challenges of multilingual classroom and that such schools need to have additional resources and funding. Assessment of language support needs. There is conclusive research evidence that poor measures of assessment on entering the school system have a detrimental impact on migrant children. This is because they are more likely to be allocated to special education and lower ability tracks. Practitioners have developed better systems for assessing children's language skills and other knowledge and competencies during the early stages of their reception into the education system. These address the causes of poor assessment that have adversely affected children without the language of instruction. Learning the language of instruction for integration into the school system. There is indicative research evidence that children without the language of instruction should be quickly moved to having targeted and continued language support provided in mainstream classrooms rather than in separate classes. The amount of time needed in preparatory education should be linked to age and previous education. Practitioners strongly support a speedy transition with teaching support because they believe this supports integration, learning the language of instruction and learning other subjects. Where separate classes are required, children without the language of instruction should be enabled to make a transition to mainstream classes with a special curriculum and support from specialist teachers. Access to the curriculum. Support in the classroom. There is indicative research evidence that the availability and level of support improves migrant children's educational attainment and that additional learning activities and support in school for children without the language of instruction can improve their progress. Practitioners strongly believe that classroom support has to be maintained to develop their language skills as well as access to the curriculum with the support of teaching assistants, specialist teachers and resources. Support outside the classroom. There is indicative research evidence that the formal and informal learning led by trained staff and volunteers outside the school enhances migrant children's interest in education, their language skill and their aspiration. This is through a variety of measures, homework clubs, out of school activities, mentoring, coaching and advice. Practitioners believe that these help and can be targeted at children who need extra support, which include migrant children. It helps to achieve positive outcomes if some of the staff or volunteers have some mother tongue or migrant background as the children and parents. Adapted teaching approaches by class teachers. There is indicative research evidence that adapting teaching approaches to accommodate children with without the same level of language ability as native children has a beneficial effect. The adaptations they effectively employ are similar to those used in content and language integrated learning (CLIL) settings. There is some evidence that providing children without the same level of language competency as native children with tools and materials assist them to achieve their potential in assessment tests. Simplifications of the language used in tests have been found to be beneficial. Practitioners believe that the teaching approaches need to be adapted in multilingual classrooms. Teachers need to be aware of this and have strategies and resources to manage. Practitioners also believe that teachers need to have positive attitudes towards migrant children if they are to achieve their potential and overcome language barriers. There is evidence that not all teachers have these positive attitudes. Parental engagement. There is some indicative research evidence that equipping migrant families with skill to develop their children's language skill in ECEC helps to accelerate their learning. Practitioners believe that engaging migrant parents is necessary throughout their children's education to build their emotional support for their children and their cooperation with the school. These are believed to improve their children's attendance, behaviors and attitudes to learning as well as mutual trust and understanding between teachers and parents. Developing mother tongue competencies, non-formal and informal learning of mother tongues. Practitioners believe that informal learning of mother tongue should be provided and encouraged both in the absence of formal learning opportunities and where formal learning of mother tongues is available. The opportunities for children to use and develop their mother tongue skills enable them to gain recognition for these skills and see they are of equal values to other language skills need to be stimulated to develop. Children need to be stimulated to develop and use their mother tongue skills. Parents, school and the community have been shown to play an effective part in this. Resources are available for non-formal and informal learning. Formal learning of mother tongues. There is conclusive research evidence that learning mother tongue alongside the language of instruction enhances not only their mother tongue competences but also their competences in the language of instruction. There is indicative research evidence that this has first, longer term benefits for educational attainment and reducing the gap between migrant children and native born children. Second, wider benefits in enhancing children's confidence and their cultural awareness and pride in their culture. Third, long-term benefits in increasing employment opportunities. Practitioners generally support the benefits of mother tongue learning through teachers are not always aware of this. Some schools and teachers continue to discourage speaking in mother tongues. Bringing mother tongues into language learning and the language curriculum as well as offering formal learning of mother tongues as foreign languages through language classes and CLIL through primary and secondary education appear to be efficient and effective approaches to achieving the benefits described in the research evidence. Teacher education. Teacher education in language teaching skills and cultural competences. Practitioners believe that teachers who provide language support should have a specialist training and qualifications in second language acquisition that is aligned with the approaches implemented in practice. Alongside, the practitioners believe that all teachers require training to teach children without the language of instruction and to be able to value diversity by incorporating cultural diversity with their teaching. This should include intercultural training. Teacher education to develop skills to support children without the language of instruction in the classroom. There is some indicative research evidence that in-service training helps teachers build their capability and resources to teach children without the language of instruction, which improves the attainment of children without the language of instruction. Practitioners strongly support this and also believe that initial teacher training ought to be adapted given significant and growing proportions of teachers who will work in multilingual classrooms. Schools and teachers benefit from the resources, networking and training provided by specialist centers in many countries and cities in the EU. Practitioners have found that networking between the within school facilitates non-formal learning by teachers to support migrant children learning. What are the factors working against migrant children achieving their potential? The evidence here broadly confirms earlier speech published by the Commission that the factors which inhibit children without the language of instruction achieving their potentials are: first, school without sufficient resources and staff with competences to support the learning of children without the language of instruction. Second, assessment tools and assessors with negative perceptions of migrant children's abilities which allocate more of them to lower ability tracks and special education classes. Third, a lack of opportunities to develop their mother tongue competences to higher levels. Fourth, although the segregation of migrant children occurs widely in the EU, this is not by itself a factor. What brings about higher attainment and reduced gap in achievement and progression? There is conclusive evidence here that ECEC for children without the language of instruction not only increases language competences but also long-term educational achievements, that language competences are related to achievement in other competences, and that targeted and continued support in language learning enables this. There is indicative evidence supported by practitioners that the following contribute to raising the attainment of children without the language of instruction. Supplementary educations, both formal and non-formal in schools and out of school, which includes help with homework, language learning including mother tongue learning and mentoring during activities. Second, immersion in mainstream classrooms with support from specialists and with teachers who have the competences and experience to tailor teaching to children in the class without the same level of competency in the language of instruction. Third, increasing their parents' support and encouragement in their education, including their development of language competences. Fourth, developing their mother tongue competences. There is no conclusive evidence about the length of time that children without the language of instruction should spend in preparation classes, but there is indicative evidence that this should be limited and should include transition to immersion with support. It should be greater for older children so that they make the transition once they have a basic competence. What increases children's development of their multilingual skills? There is indicative evidence that children without the language of instruction can increase their skills to higher levels where, first, ECEC enables them to learn their mother tongue as well as language of instruction. Second, non-formal and informal learning opportunities enable them to use their mother tongue. Third, formal learning opportunities are available either in school or out of school to develop their mother tongue skills, which progress towards recognition in educational achievement. What improves intercultural education? Practitioners strongly believe that intercultural education is more likely to be achieved and achieved more quickly where schools are less segregated and children are more rapidly immersed in mainstream classroom. This is because this provides greater opportunities for cultural awareness and valuing diversity through teaching and learning. There is indicative evidence that the following is beneficial. First, increasing all children's cultural and linguistic awareness through both language learning and other parts of the curriculum. Second, engaging parents in the school activities and their children's education. Third, increasing teachers' positive attitudes towards migrant children's prospects and their use of mother tongue to learn. Purpose of this research. The European Commission has developed a report on language teaching and learning in multilingual classrooms (RLMC) to provide more guidance on successfully meeting the challenges posed by teaching children the language of instruction as well as building on the opportunities they provide to broaden multilingual skills within the EU. The present report will also provide policy and practice recommendations for discussion with the member state authorities. Commission guidance and support within the Open Method of Coordination (OMC). The Commission has supported member states' actions through the OMC with research, guidance and best practice and funding for collaborative learning. The Commission published a Green Paper in 2008 to support consultation on the actions needed within the EU to address the education needs of children with a migrant background. It recognized that education systems had challenges in meeting the needs of a more diverse range of pupils and that this required the skill of teachers and school leaders. But the migrant children, including those from a second generation, were generally more likely to be early school leavers and less likely to progress to higher education. Research at the time identified that causes of these inequalities included segregation in poorer performing schools, socio-economic disadvantage, lower expectations of their attainment within schools, access to ECEC, and insufficient proficiency in the language of instruction and assessment. The educational achievement of migrant children. International comparisons can be used. International test data available. Across the OECD, migrant people as a whole scored on average 32 points lower in the PISA mathematics assessment and 21 points lower after accounting for socio-economic status. The growth and extent of multilingual classrooms. With increased mobility between EU and countries continued in migration to the EU recent years, have seen increases in many member states of the linguistic diversity of classroom and expansion in the areas where schools have multilingual classroom. PISA data, for example, shows that on an average, the proportion of pupils not speaking the language of instruction increased by 1% point. For example, the percentage of pupils in English primary and secondary language aged 5 to 16 who are recorded as not speaking the language of instruction more than the double from 7.6%. As a consequence, schools in varying degrees have multilingual classroom. This shows that in many countries, large numbers of pupils are in school with a high proportion of pupils who do not speak the language of assessment at home. National policies and responses. Approaches to teaching improving competences in the language of instruction and assessment. Two models exist. These are: first, pupils are quickly integrated within the normal class for their age group, lower age group in some cases, and receive special support. Or they are kept separate until their language skills are greater and receive tuition according to their needs. Learning the language of instruction. It is widely accepted that competence in the language used for instruction provides for children to achieve their potential, participate in and be integrated into the wider society and offer a wider choice of better paid employment. Children with poorer language skills tend not to achieve their potential, with more migrant children leaving school early and fewer migrant children progressing to higher education. There are in most countries significant gaps between the educational achievements of migrant children and those of non-migrant children. Barriers affect outcomes. There are barriers which children without the language of instruction face to achieving their educational potential. These are broadly related to: first, the ability of school and the teachers within them to provide effective support for learning and language of instruction. The resources in schools and education authorities to provide support to children and the opportunities to learn their mother tongue and other languages. Third, the school system which disproportionately allocate them to lower ability streams and special needs education. Fourth, the relative lack of migrant parents' knowledge and understanding of education systems to make choices and engage with their children's education. Last, the lower expectations teachers have of children without the language of instruction. Consideration: to meet the needs of the study, to identify what works to enable pupils without the language of instruction, and assessment to achieve their potential and develop their multilingual skills. An initial view of the material and the evidence underpinning found that there is a considerable academic literature on theories around cultural integration and the wider benefits of language learning, which is widely accepted through not necessarily supported by unequivocal empirical evidence. There is a considerable grey literature on what is considered to be good practice and good practice materials collected and developed by practitioners. And this can be accepted as evidence of what works if the process of reviewing practices which are used is systematic and widely engages practitioners, especially in translational. A framework for the review of evidence and its support, with the focus on identifying policy relevant approaches and measures that are effective in delivering positive educational outcomes for children without the language of instruction. Policy measures and activities have been grouped around learning language of instruction sufficiently to be integrated into schooling, improving language and other skills to access the curriculum, developing mother tongue competences to improve proficiencies in language learning, intercultural awareness and cognitive skills. Developing mother tongue competences. This includes formal learnings of the mother tongue, recognition of mother tongue competences, encouraging use of the mother tongue in school and other settings. These would be expected to raise children's motivations to learn their mother tongue and to improve children's mother tongue skills and other language competences, their cultural education and the cultural awareness of other children. Teacher education. This includes practitioners' views and experience. Practitioners widely believe that ECEC for children without the language of instruction is of paramount importance in developing their language skills before compulsory primary schooling begins. However, their parents are generally least likely to take it up, so even where it is free, it is necessary to have outreach workers and bilingual staff to encourage participation. It highlights the following proven approaches for early language learning with children from a migrant background. First, promote initiatives that help migrant families to gain a real appreciation of the importance of learning the language of instruction in the formal education system as early as possible and of their role in these processes. Second, link language learning in the promotion of intercultural awareness for both pupils and staff. Example, encourage engagement of migrant community groups with civil society, attract and engage staff who are second generation migrants in the early education workforce, encourage and motivate children from a minority or migrant background to use their language, knowledge and intercultural experiences in the school's daily activities. Stimulate interest in the language of instruction as well as the mother tongue through appropriate motivation methods, particularly play-based methods. Ideally, staff should have a solid grounding in how language acquisition works, particularly with respect to young children. Without the language of instruction, staff should also be trained to monitor language development. At last, but not the least, I would like to conclude my views about the multilingualism, embracing multilingualism in classroom by saying that from what I read, another way of promoting multilingualism in school is to encourage the use of new technologies to reinforce the development of home language literacies as well as English. These technologies help to give pupils the opportunities to use less dominant languages and plenty of other ones when doing their work to help them complete their best work rather than having to attempt to complete it in a language they are not comfortable with. Therefore, improving their educational experience, allowing them to achieve their full potential. Thank you. Lastly, from what I read, another way of promoting multilingualism in school is to encourage the use of new technologies to reinforce the development of home language literacies as well as English. These technologies help to give pupils the opportunities to use less dominant languages and and plenty of other ones doing their work to help them complete their best work. Rather than having to attempt to complete it in a language they are not comfortable in, therefore improving their educational experience, allowing them to achieve their full potential. It is therefore important that schools encourage as much as use of other languages and cultures as possible in order to help pupils feel welcome, included, supported, and confident in their learning, no matter where a pupil is from. They all deserve equal chances to do their best in school, and by getting rid of language barriers, it can make all the difference. It is important to create interpersonal spaces within the classroom that support the development of literacy in both English and the home language of each child. This will make all pupils feel comfortable to embrace each other's difference in a shared space. This is good because in schools it will promote pupils to internationally minded pupils through developing skills of appreciation. Thank you.